the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampires, and there's a host of damned souls of telepaths.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen from the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show of the paranormal, God knows what, where, when, how and why.
That was a good one.
Yeah. They kept the F-bombs away.
Yeah. Yep, go ahead.
Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the Paranormal... Sorry about this, Carl. Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And I'm here again tonight with Mark Johnson.
Hello.
Nearly said Markle Farkle then.
Yeah, almost. Well, at least you didn't this time. I feel like you haven't stripped me of my manhood then.
Would I strip you of your manhood?
Call me Markle Farkle.
I'll find it.
Yeah, as I told our listeners, my aunts used to call me that when I was a kid, so I made the mistake of telling you that, and now you won't let it go.
Well, I can't get it out of my head. It always sticks with me. I can remember Markle Farkle better than I can remember Mark Johnson. You know that?
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, so change your name.
We've only been working together how many years?
About 10, 15.
Going on 10 at least.
10 at least.
Oh,
yeah, it's
good
been a
Lord.
long time. Oh, my God.
What a decade it's been.
Yes, it has, hasn't it?
Yes.
Where have we been? We've been everywhere, haven't we? Oh, dear. We've done everything.
Not everything. We've tried doing everything. We've tried doing everything.
Yeah. Well, we've been pretty good, I tell you. Yeah. Anyway, come off that. Do you know I've got 2 named storms heading for the UK right now?
Uh-oh, batten down the hatches.
Yeah, I can't remember their names, but one's going to hit tomorrow in the North and Midlands, and I hope everyone up there be safe. And, yeah, like Mark says, batten down the hatches. And the other one, Friday, is hitting straight on Wales and across the south.
Yeah, you'll need to watch out for that one.
I will. Because I got one of these big plastic polytunnels in the garden where I'm storing all my tender plants, like, bougainvillea and things like that, and lemon trees. They're all in this big plastic thing out in the garden, and I know if the storm hits, that thing's going to end up on my roof of the house. Good
Lord.
Yeah.
Well, be careful. I mean, we've had very strange weather over here in the U.S. on the East Coast. We've had brutally cold weather, single digits in the morning, and then and then this weekend it got up into the 50s. I was sitting outside my sister-in-law's house, having a big bonfire and some wine, and it was nice.
So you're going from fur coats to bikinis.
Yeah, now we're back to fur coats because it's bloody cold outside. and we had the next morning we had 3 inches of snow. So go figure.
It's crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy.
Well,
yeah.
I think Mother Nature is reacting to the rest of the craziness.
Yeah. Well, it's been absolutely pelting down with rain here all day today, and I can't get Gertrude out.
Uh-oh. Put some newspaper down.
Put some newspaper down. I had an awful job getting her out from underneath the table when she saw the rain outside the back door. You know? She hasn't got a tail, has she? She's a British bulldog. And you try picking up a British bulldog and throwing them out the door to do their business. Especially that one. She just will not go over the threshold.
I try to get my beagle Molly to go out when it's raining real hard, and she'll take one step out, look at it, and says, "Oh, screw this," turn around and run right back into the house.
Well, that's what she does. You can chuck her out onto the step just outside the door, but she's somehow she just doesn't a U-turn so quick, and she's back in, and she's under the table.
Yep.
You know, and she won't come out.
Dogs just do not want to get wet.
No, especially females.
Yep. Mm. Well, you know, it's your hair.
Sorry?
It's the hair. You can't mess up the hair.
Can't mess up the hair. Yeah. Anyway, let's get on with the show, shall we?
I think we should. Okay. So our guest tonight, we got a really good show tonight and a very interesting topic. Our guest is Carl Abrahamsson. Now, Carl is an author, publisher, I have to say this right, a magico-anthropologist, photographer, and filmmaker. He most recently produced a documentary on Anton LeVay, Into the Devil's Den. And he's mostly written about occulture, or how occultism and hidden ideas interact with our general culture. So, Carl, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you, Carl.
Now, the occult is something that's always been interesting to me, especially, I don't know if you're aware of this, Carl, but both Irene and I have been longtime paranormal investigators, and we've worked on a number of different cases, including mostly Irene, some pretty dark ones in her day. Mm-hmm. But we've interviewed some people about who are in the Church of Satan. Eric Werner, I don't know if you've ever heard of Eric over here in the U.S. He's written a lot of novels. I mean, a lot of books as well. Mm-hmm. But your book, and I know it was officially supposed to be launched this month, and I think you can get it in the U.S., but you said there's been some distribution problems, so maybe some places in Europe might have to wait till March. But the new book is called Anton LeVay and the Church of Satan, Infernal Wisdom from the Devil's Den. So right then and there, you've grabbed me. So,
of course.
So before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. What got you interested in occultism, and then how in the heck did you get caught up with Anton LeVay?
Yeah, these are long topics and threads, but I'm going to try to be focused and sort of focus on the most important paths and no digressions. The first one, you know, when you're a teenager, you're looking for things to define yourself. And many people, not everyone, but many people go into so-called forbidden territories because they want to be a little bit rebellious and they want to be a little bit, you know, controversial perhaps. And I don't think I was any different. And one area that attracted me was the so-called occult. And, you know, that's a huge term, as we know. You can encompass so many different things. It could be, you know, alchemy or Renaissance magic or old Egyptian magic or Western ceremonial magic or Satanism. But I was like a little sponge, interested in all these things. I found a resonance with the fact that people had tried to empower themselves by being more in tune with what I call greater nature, with outer nature. So, you know, this resonance between the inner nature that we have and the outer nature in around us. Of course, when you're looking at these things and you're a teenager and you're sort of devouring books and movies and culture in general that has these themes, then you can, after a while, weed certain things out, things that don't continue to strike up this resonance. And I had, at that time, which is basically mid-'80s for me, LeVay's Satanic Bible was readily available, even in Stockholm, Sweden, where I grew up. Because there were still occult bookstores back then, and they all carried this book. And I did find that very, very interesting because of the fact that he had left this sort of arcane, dusty approach to magic that was still very much 20th century staple in a way, sort of the legacy of the Golden Dawn, for instance. And I found it very interesting. And for me, there was also a parallel strain, which was that I loved specifically American, trash culture, B movies, exploitation movies. That said, there were these sort of key people that I really enjoyed, specifically like the wacky peroxided blondes, Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield, and perhaps Jane Mansfield specifically. She really interested me. And the thing is that it didn't take long until I realized that she had actually been a member of the Church of Satan. And they had, LeVay and her had, or perhaps didn't, but they, allegedly they had a little fling. They were both great PR savvy people, so they knew that them together was like, fireworks or dynamite. But that made an impression already in my teenage mind. And then it was sort of larger than life, the fact that they had actually hung out together. Then when I had had enough of the sort of taking in of culture, then of course you get interested in sort of trying things yourself. And for me, music was very, very important. And I had a band, which is something that you would have at some point in life. And my band was called White Stains. And the first record that we made was a song called Sweet Jane. Not the Lou Reed song, but a song about the relationship between Jane Mansfield and Anton LeVay. And there were many other things going on in my life at this time. I was a practicing or experimenting occultist or magician. I had a network, an active network of people, including the Temple of Psychic Youth and Genesis Peorage in the UK. And when that record came out, Genesis said, "Why don't you send this to Anton LeVay? I'm sure he would find it amusing." And I did, because Jen had the address, and I just sent it off, and I didn't, expect anything from that. But I did get a letter back saying, that he really appreciated the initiative, and that's how, Jane still lives on, and, really a lauding kind of letter, very encouraging for me. And he also made me a member of the Church of Satan. And then this was in 1988. And the next year I had saved up enough money to go over and see him and be at Black House. And that was the beginning of a friendship that lasted up until he died, basically in 1997. I tried to go back to San Francisco as much as I could to be in the devil's den, basically.
Now, I'm not the biggest, I'm not up to speed completely on LeVay, but wasn't his brand of Satanism, the Church of Satan, not really devil worshipping, but more of a different type of creed? At least that's what I've heard when I've talked to other people who were part of the Church of Satan.
Yeah, absolutely. No devil worship whatsoever. Satan, the concept of Satan in the Church of Satan is just it's a symbol of a force that sort of goes against, that challenges things that are inert or too much in the status quo. It could be provocative. It could also be healthy. I sometimes look at it as Satan is the immune system of the organism in a way. It needs to rebel to show that something is wrong. So there's none of this anthropomorphical, devils or something that basically stems from Christian medieval fantasies. None of that. Satanism, according to LeVay, is very rational. It's very down to earth. There's really no lofty spiritual aspects. I mean, people are free to have those if they want to, but in the sort of teaching or his writings, you can't find much of that. It's very down to earth, in a way materialistic, although he certainly acknowledged that there are things that can be called magical. And I guess instead of calling it supernatural, perhaps we should call it supranatural, in the sense that it's something that is kind of hard to define, that exists above and beyond and around, but it's not something that you could say is, that's a ghost and we can have these experiments, meaning applying a kind of empirical approach to these things that are simply either way, way, way down in our psyches, in our unconscious, subconscious, or out there in nature, but so ephemeral in a way that we cannot define it yet. So his approach towards magic was causal, you could say, manipulative in a way. That's what he called lesser magic. But there was also certainly an acknowledgement of the fact that the greater magic or the higher magic was something where you ritualized your desire, whatever you wanted to have happen. You ritualized it in a special space, in a special time, and in a special way, and that had effects outside of that space, outside of that time. And hence, there you have, I would say, a belief in magic, that magic works. Then, of course, you could argue, is it in the psyche or is it out there in the causal materiality? That's really besides the point, as long as it works. So that's how I would define it. No devil worship, a rational approach, but also an acknowledgement of magic.
Now, there are some Satanists I know that would consider themselves really to be atheists. Others might have, more of a spiritual inclination. I mean, how would you define your own beliefs?
Well, I would say that it's absolutely true that LeVay's legacy and the Church of Satan, and also people who like him but perhaps are not members, I would say that atheism is a pretty common attitude. But also there are people who like LeVay, acknowledge magic, and perhaps there is no, opposition. There is no nothing contrary in those two stances in a way. For me personally, as you introduced me in the beginning, I see myself very much as a magical anthropologist. What that means is that I've spent decades collecting material and looking at things and going on little expeditions and interviewing people, writing about these things. Basically, why is it that magic as such is so integrated in human culture and in human life? So, because there is a red thread through all human cultures, all through history, even today, that magical thinking and magical behavior, ritualized behavior, it's completely integrated. So I would find myself there in the sense I have an open mind. I do believe in, the positive, beneficial aspects of rational thinking and, being sort of down to earth, like I said. But at the same time, I cannot deny things that I've seen and experienced, for instance, in other cultures, but also in my own culture, which are simply not materialist. They are simply not causal. They're simply not prone to be interpreted in a simple way. Again, let for the sake of it, let's use the term supernatural, because it's something that I think we are more accustomed to using. So I think I could say that I've experienced supernatural things in the sense that they have defied my sense of logic. They have defied my sense of rational analysis, and I like that. I am not afraid of that. I like that very much, and it's not a thing that I strive for in itself. Pushing the boundaries, whatever. It's just that there are things beyond my comprehension, and whether they are sort of outside forces or something that's happening in my own psyche while looking at certain things, I don't know. And I also don't feel that I need to know. I'm not an empiricist in that sense. I'm more of an anthropologist who looks at these things basically because I'm very thrilled and interested in them.
And as someone who has actually delved into that, I've had a lot of my own experiences, so I know definitely there's something going on. But I'm also not traditional in terms that I don't automatically put labels on things when they do happen. I'm still looking and searching for answers, and I think some things really take place more on the quantum and interdimensional level. So very interesting. Now, with the occult in itself, before we get more into LeVay in the book, I mean, what types of occult and magic have you practiced or experimented with?
Well, I went to some pretty good schools in the sense that I was involved with different groups, and they all sort of filled the needs that I had at the time and gave me a good schooling, so to speak. I think the first one that I was actively involved with was the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was an international network, you could say, like an occultural network, but also a little bit like a think tank or a magical order. It was very experimental and existed between approximately 1981 and 1991. And I was active in that, running the Scandinavian branch, which was called Topiscan. And it was sort of conceived by Genesis Peorage, the artist, and some other people, stemming from an environment of experimental music and experimental lifestyles. And basically, that was parallel with what's called chaos magic, with a group called IoT, and had a very strict approach to magic, meaning that kind of a legacy stemming from Crowley on one hand, but also Austin Osman Spare, the great British painter who was also a very prominent occultist, used sort of a psychological language and a psychological method in a way of programming yourself, not like NLP or anything like that, but more like ecstatic programming in sexual ecstasy or other kinds of physical ecstasy. You sort of use sigils or meditations. So it's pretty hardcore. If for outer reference, you could say that some of it is even tantric in the sense that it uses elevated states of mind stemming from an ecstatic physical sense to change things in the outer through your psyche that's experienced in these things. And then as I drifted into my friendship with LeVay, I was also engaged in the Church of Satan in the sense that I met a lot of people and they were smart and great, and many of them are still friends, as you can see in the book and also in the film. And that's been, something that's ongoing, but hasn't really been something that I have worked with on a regular basis. Whereas I joined the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, Crowley's group, in 1989, and I spent 3 full decades in the OTO working their system and helping out and doing what I felt was necessary there. And I also spent a great many years in like a Golden Dawn group, and then some other groups, and some are secret. But I feel that I've received a good schooling in all these groups, both in terms of respecting tradition, but also respecting breaking tradition. So I feel that when I came out of the schooling, so to speak, I felt that I was a solid and stable person who could define myself magically in a way, and I'm very happy about that.
Now, when it comes to magic, let's say And again, I'm trying to understand as someone who's totally on the outside as far as this is concerned. You know, you would use it for, as you mentioned, for some personal improvements, gratification, whatnot. What other uses would you have for it?
Well, you know, those things that you mentioned could be completely all-encompassing, or they could be small and very temporary. You know, a word like gratification, it sort of implies something that is short-term and a little flair, and it goes back to something else. But a gratification could also be on a larger or bigger existential level, that I'm gratified in the sense that I feel, for instance, that I have used magic to improve myself, to deal with my shortcomings or weaknesses, so that I am today much more stable and constructive and creative than I was perhaps 10 years ago. Then, of course, maybe you can't pinpoint, you know, analytically and say that it's all thanks to magic. That to me sounds almost religious in a bad way. But I have certainly used magical methods and rituals and meditations and all kinds of things in order to achieve short-term results, but also these longer-term projects of defining, redefining, improving, developing myself, basically.
How would you say, with your magical practices, how would that differ for our audience to understand? How would that differ from people who practice more pagan style occult practices, like Wiccans or, you know, witches, however you want to call it, those types of older nature types of religions?
I would say it doesn't differ at all. It's just a different kind of language, and that's something that, you know, in my work as a magical anthropologist, I've well, it's not my conclusion, but I still come to the conclusion that, you know, magic is in all human cultures, in all different times. Whether we look at, you know, ancient history or contemporary times, it's so present. It's just that some larger structures, belief structures, mainly, you know, monotheist religions, have tried to put a lid on something that is simply indestructible for control purposes. But at the same time, they also use the same, I don't know, group dynamic methods that basically stem from group ritual settings, regardless of which culture we look at. So I would say that, you know, when what you mentioned with Wicca and pagans and stuff like that, I see that a little bit as more collective things, you know, working in groups. But everyone who works in a group is also an individual. So I would say that if you're a pagan who or a Wiccan who really loves that and finds a resonance in that, then they will use that kind of approach even on their own individual level to sort of enhance or amplify what they do in group form, and also vice versa. But in terms of reaching something, reaching personal goals, or reaching short-term gratifications, or reaching these longer-term self-developments, I think anyone who works in the occult, so to speak, I think they have these things on their mind and actively try to use the techniques that have been presented to them or that they have found themselves for their own benefit, simply. And that, what I just said, for their benefit, that could also, of course, mean for the benefit of other people. Because, you know, man is a social animal, and we are integrated in various group structures. So I think, I mean, it's just speculation in a way, but anyone who's involved in occultism, whether it's traditional or new or experimental, it's basically the same desire that's behind it, right? It's empowering yourself to be able to feel that you can change your situation whether for long term or short term. And also this thing, by doing that, you acquire a sense of existential agency. That's a good thing. And that's an important part in this process of finding a meaning in life. Because it's hard to find a meaning in life if you feel completely devoid of personal agency.
Well, let me ask, what types, could you be a little more specific on what types of self-improvement somebody would use it for? What are you looking to do? Like in either to increase your confidence and increase certain, physical attributes or, mental attributes? I mean, give us some examples on how you would use these practices.
Yeah, I would say all of the above, because people are different. We're all individuals, but at the same time, there are so many things that unite us in the sense that we're basically all looking for the same kind of thing. We want to, survive, of course. We want to find and maintain a meaningful life. And we have a biological program that says we want to procreate, and whether that's used for actual procreation or just as a general drive in life, that's up to each and everyone, of course. So an improvement in all of these overarching things could be simply to, for instance, confront yourself with the fact that you're lazy, for instance, or you overindulge in these carbs, for instance, or you're afraid of certain group dynamics, afraid to take space in the workspace, etc. Then, if you're honest and don't shy away from these sort of insights, but rather look at yourself in the mirror and say that these things I really need to work with, and they can, of course, be worked with on what I call a causal level, cause and effect. I make a decision, I stick to it, and I get the result. But for many people who are stuck in habits, for instance, it can be a good thing to, for instance, ritualize your willingness, your will to change a certain thing, and how you do that's up to each and everyone, depending on what kind of system they're in, or if they're just intuitively, for instance, writing down their desire and burning it in a little candle, whatever. It's the thing. What makes this work is the fact that you invest yourself in a particular moment, in a particular mind frame, that becomes like a little extra charge to yourself. It's not just casually looking at yourself in the mirror saying, oh boy, I should really lose some weight. It's going into a deeper level saying, I'm going to change this. I'm going to change it right now. And since from my experience I haven't been successful with this, I am going to make this ritual to make a deeper sense of me understand that it's serious, that I mean it, that I really want this to happen.
So it's performing a ritual, which again could be similar to other types of, like, somebody maybe meditating, chanting a daily mantra.
Yes.
Anything that helps ingrain that into the person, usually through repetition, in order to reinforce a desired outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one key to this is just that we are living in a culture that is, very, perhaps too much based in rational behavior. We live in a causal thing. We do this because we're expected to do this, and we process information basically rationally, and we communicate rationally, make certain that people understand what we say. But we are more complex than that. We have other kinds of layers in our psyches and our drives and all these things that also want attention in a way. So we have to sort of juggle these things. And by, as you said, repetition of a mantra or an actual, ecstatic ritual, that's how we get beyond the rational. The rational is great for us to function in a rational society, but it's also a little bit of a hindrance. It's a hampering force in us getting in touch with deeper levels of ourselves. And I think it's very, very important for overall health of the individual to be able to shut down, in a way, if we use technological lingo, to put our machinery and our data in rest mode by meditation or by just physical exercise and or ritualizing in a more concrete aspect, because all of these things permit us to go deeper. And that's really where the, let's call it the programming potential resides. It doesn't reside in the rational. The rational can only do what it's told, basically. And then you have to look at it, who is telling my rational self to do these things. And hopefully it'll be your deeper aspects of yourself.
Now,
that was interesting. I've missed half of this, Carl, because I had an asthma attack and I had to walk away from the microphone. Right. I'm sorry about that. I'm just hoping my lungs will hold up for now.
Well,
sorry, Mark.
Do you have some questions to ask?
No, I just wanted to know. Like I say, I've missed most of it. One question I do want to know is, Carl, do you think an inanimate object can hold a power of its own?
Sorry, that an inanimate object can hold the power of its own?
Like
absolutely. And then we come into this field of talismania, for instance, where inanimate objects are completely invested with energy and life force by the force of a magician or several. I mean, that's a foundation of magical tradition and magical history, and also a part of our magical behavior even today, where we invest on the surface inanimate objects with life. I would say, for instance, with the smartphones, that's a good example. It's essentially a little computer that is actually inanimate because they don't have a soul yet. They can't really function on their own.
I don't know. Alexa's doing pretty good over here.
Yeah, but then we drift into very sort of, I would say, demonic territories with artificial intelligence. Maybe we should leave that for now. But what I mean is simply that things that are basically telephones with added benefits, we invest ourselves in, because through those we can reach the platforms that gratify our egos and vanities immediately. So it creates a habit structure. So in that sense, I would say it's a negative thing. But also, if you have a cherished object, for instance, an heirloom, something that on the surface is absolutely inanimate, it can be ensouled, because you look at it and feel that it's ensouled, because it comes from a dear relative or from someone you respect, etc., etc. It could also, of course, be something from nature, a stick or a stone or a shell that you find so beautiful. Technically, rationally, it's inanimate, but you know that it's alive. You know that it has a soul, that it's enchanted. And so my answer to your question is yes, I do believe that.
Okay, and can this object, do you think, over time be enchanted by no end of owners, however many owners it's had? In other words, do you think that something that was very, very old, and maybe a magician or somebody has enchanted something into the ring or whatever? I'm talking about my ring, obviously, everybody.
Let me clarify.
I think this is time for you to show Carl.
Yeah, I'll send him I'll send you the picture, Carl. But just to clarify a little bit, can an object used in occult rituals take on either a spiritual attachment or even, build up enough energy that it forms its own type of consciousness?
Yes.
I think so. And I think the crucial question is whether our apprehension of that requires a human mind to feel that or interpret that. Because we could say that like some people do it, the animists, for instance, say that everything is alive, everything has a soul, and that's all fair and fine. But if we, for instance, have the object that we call X, object X, that has been talismanically invested by a magician, for instance, and then, if I understand it correctly, later on in a completely different context, will that have the power to affect others talismanically and perhaps become like a cult object? And I would say yes, because we all know, for instance, that we are very affected by old things. Like when we go into old churches or old houses, things that have survived and seen life and death and birth and, war and whatever, that kind of thing affects you. Whereas if you go into a brand new building of concrete and glass and steel that is brand new, there is no life in there yet. There might be, but it takes, I think, a human investment of life force, whether you call it, libidinal force or Reichsorgan or just residue of happiness or ecstasy. It requires that kind of investment.
Okay.
Well, we just sent you a picture.
One other question.
Okay.
I know Aleister Crowley had a thing for, how do I word this? He had a thing for Pan. He believed that Pan and the devil were one and the same. LeVay? Was he the same? Was he of the same mind as Aleister Crowley, that he believed this?
Well, I think there's a huge difference between them. Crowley had a religious mind. LeVay had mainly a rational mind. And LeVay could look at, for instance, Pan and the Panic rituals and the Lupercalia of Rome and pagan things as something very, very interesting to study, mainly also because the Pan figure, the faun, in a way, became the aesthetic prototype of the later monotheists reclothing that as the devil, whatever that is. So it's a kind of an icon.
The hooved feet and all that, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a kind of an icon that grew out of healthy paganism, where the Pan or the faun was associated with a very strong and healthy sexual drive that was, blessing the culture with fertility, for instance. And that over time became something completely different when the monotheists sort of corrupted that image. That's how I would say LeVay would have a historic approach to that, because for LeVay and Satanists, there is no devil figure. There's nothing anthropomorphic. There's nothing supernaturally, like the devil. Whereas for Crowley, I think, he wrote some beautiful poems, Hymn to Pan and all these things. And it's this kind of raging ecstasy. He really catches that pagan fervor in a way, in quite a beautiful way. So I think that Crowley looked at these things much more romantically. He was not really a man of the 20th century. His mind was sort of stuck in the 19th century, where you had this infusion of romantic poetry and I would say post-pre-Raphaelite approach to paganism, for instance. So I would say that I'm not sure, Crowley believed in a devil figure either. He had this kind of, it's not an ambivalence, but he had this almost contradictory approach where he definitely wanted his magic, his methods, his system to be empirically verified, to be justified through a scientific method. And he had this, motto for the Equinox, his magazine or journal, the method of science, the aim of religion. And I think both of those things, in hindsight, didn't turn out so well, because the method of science we are experiencing today, and it's not really doing that well or going that well. And also the aim of religion, that's also for me kind of a, I don't know, not perhaps negative, but it has a certain ring to it. And these two things together, I think in Crowley's mind, were very optimistic. he wanted to change things, both in terms of magic, but also perhaps in culture in general. But I think he should have stuck to just writing about it and not perhaps sloganeering so much.
Well, one of the reasons we're asking about this, and especially with your expertise in occult and cultural anthropology, is that if you look at your Skype account, I just sent you a photo. And
all right.
This photo is of a ring that we've mentioned on this show to our listeners many times before, that Irene acquired many, many years ago in Italy.
50-odd years ago.
Yes. And it, first glance, people would look at it and go, oh, it's a devil's head. But we've done a lot of research into this ring, and we feel it may be more, being that it was found in Italy, more of a representation of Pan. And
the Barrios.
We also we've sent photos to the British Museum in London, and without actually being able to examine the ring, just looking at it, they seem to think it's at least a few hundred years old.
Yeah,
maybe longer.
It's carved from one nugget of silver, handmade.
Mm-hmm.
There is no seams on it or anything like it would be if it was machine made.
Yeah.
And it's very, very heavy. His eyes are bright red. They're either garnets or rubies. They're an old setting.
Mm-hmm.
And he has two sides to his face. If you turn him one side, he seems to be grinning at you. If you turn him the other way, he's sneering.
All right.
And...
well, the ring also definitely seems to have its own energy and personality imbued in it.
Mm-hmm. And it's a little devil, I tell you. I have to keep it locked up. I have to keep it locked in a safe to make it behave.
Right. But it's also very interesting, though, because just like in human interactions, we can see the same thing, with objects, because we are, of course, who we are. We define ourselves, but we are also, to a great extent, what other people project on us. And that's true for objects also. We could say that, if a ring that comes from India, for instance, and has a swastika on it, we would say this is a good, auspicious, benevolent ring. But if a ring that comes from Germany in the 1930s that also has a swastika, we would say that this is an evil ring, signifying something evil. But they're both rings with swastikas. If you see where I'm drifting, it's also we project on it how these things connect to us. And we use a lot of different interpretation models, cultural, historical, and of course, irrational, emotional, intuitive. Like when you're looking at your ring, you feel that it's so strong that you have to lock it in a box so that it doesn't create any mischief. It's communicating with you because you are open for that communication. Other people would just say,
it does. It calls to me.
Yeah, right. Well, there you go. But whereas if you showed it to someone, a neighbor or something, they would just see, oh, that's an old ring. It wouldn't talk to them.
I don't know. I did force a friend to put it on her finger once, and it was vibrating on her finger.
All right.
And what it has a habit of doing, when you put it on, it's much too big. But within seconds, it tightens right up, and you have to get the soap to get it off.
Right.
But,
it sounds like a ring of power, Lord of the Rings.
And I'll tell you how it came about. It used to belong to an old hermit that lived in the mountains in the south of Italy. About, God knows how many years ago, because I've had it, 50? And he never, ever took it off his finger. Never took it off his finger. Anyway, the ring actually, through an ex-boyfriend of mine, found its way to the UK. It brought him so much bad luck, and being Catholic, he believed it was the ring causing it. He went and buried it in the churchyard, about 4 foot away from the church wall, or 5 foot away from the church wall. Anyway, one day he tells me about this ring, And it had been buried there apparently all year, and into the next year it was still there. We'd gone through winter, spring, summer, rain, snow, the lot. Anyway, he tells me about this ring, and of course I'm curious, being me, and I made him, and I went with him to dig it up. Now, the whole churchyard, the grass in the churchyard had been mown. And I said to him, whereabouts is it? He said, there. And I looked, and there was a tuft of grass about a foot high, right? And he said, that's where it is. So I tried pulling the tuft of grass, but it wouldn't come out because it was well bedded into the soil with the roots and everything. But eventually what we did, we dug the ring out, and it came out of the ground as clean as it is on my finger.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if it hadn't been for that tuft of grass growing on it, I would have said that it had just been put there. But it couldn't have been put there because this tuft of grass was so strong. It wasn't ordinary lawn grass. It was like field grass.
Right.
And it's been with me ever since. You know, it lived for so many years in the attic, in a box in the attic. Then I moved house, brought it down here. It lived in the attic here for a while. And then one day I got it out to talk about it to, I think it might have been Mark or somebody. And since then it's lived in the safe, but it calls to me when it's had enough of being in the safe. And I bring it out every now and then. I put it on and I'll wear it. And then when I've had enough of it, I put it back in the safe. But it's actually jumped out of the safe. And not fallen, because if something falls out the safe, it drops straight to the floor, especially if it's a weighty object, doesn't it? It doesn't jump about 4 foot over and land on the floor. Do you understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, that's super fascinating.
This little so-and-so has leapt out of the safe on more than one occasion.
Right.
When I've opened the door.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think also that to tie this in with LeVay and his beginnings, you know, he had such an interesting life before the Church of Satan, you know, being a musician and a circus worker, carnival worker. But he also worked as a psychic investigator, often in cahoots with the San Francisco police, meaning they called him when there were things that were simply too weird or too paranormal in a way. And he had a very open-minded attitude. You know, I believe, based on my own experiences with him, that he absolutely believed in magic and, you know, forces beyond our comprehension in a way. But also he was in a kind of tradition at the time that was, I would say, almost stemming from Harry Houdini and James Randi and William Lindsay Gresham and these people who were basically debunkers. You know, they were debunkers mainly of spiritualists that were so prevalent at the turn of the century, between the 19th and 20th centuries. But at the same time, many of these people, including Harry Houdini, you know, he was working his tricks, but I do believe that he believed actually more than he dared admit. Someone like James Randi, I don't know. He's simply too rational and critical. But for LeVay, I know that he debunked a lot of stuff. It was like old ladies who called and they had heard something rattling in their attic, whatever, and he found these things. There were no ghosts. They were just like material objects. But at the same time, all of these things, both the materialist critical attitude and the openness, really coalesced into something that LeVay called the magic circle. And these were meetings that he had at his black house before the Church of Satan had been founded. There was basically groups of people who were so curious, but they had nowhere to go to discuss these interesting things. And LeVay was already, this was in the early 1960s, kind of an expert and held lectures about all these things. And he had something called the Witches' Workshop, which was basically him talking to women of all ages who wanted to know about, you know, different spells and things. Yeah. But he learned as much from them as they learned from him. And it's just fantastic, I think, when people get together and actually process these kinds of things, because I believe that now in our contemporary times, these areas are in a way, they're all over the place. They're very visible and audible. We can see and we can acquire the information without any problem, just a couple of clicks away in the computer. But at the same time, they are even less meaningful to the overall culture. It's almost like a sense of ridicule that's more prevalent now than it used to be. Say maybe 50 years ago, people were very, critical. If someone came forward and said, I believe in this, I'm an occultist, whatever, then you had this sort of label as a kook or a semi-crazy person. Whereas today, after the Lords of the Rings and Harry Potters and whatnots, magic is so out in the culture, but it still has that sort of stamp of disapproval because of the fact that for someone to use these magical methods for real is something that is threatening to people who are stuck in their own status quo, basically, and they are too controlled by rational processes. And for me, this thing, actually getting to know LeVay and in a way learning from him and seeing that he had gone from basically circus worker, musician, someone who did these sort of debunking psychic investigations, yet having an open mind, and then getting together with other people who were equally interested. And that created a fundament that is still resonating today, with the Church of Satan and beyond, basically LeVay's legacy. And for me, that's amazing. It's just a few people who have dared to step forward and present ideas old ideas in a new package, or new ideas in a new package, and just seeing where it goes. And I think that audacity is really what pushes human culture forward.
So, speaking of LeVay, let's dive more into it and your book, LeVay and the Church of Satan. Mm-hmm. Now, how many years did you know and work with LeVay?
Well, we met the first time in 1989, and then I was in San Francisco, I would say almost every year up until 1993. And then there were a couple of years when I couldn't go, and then suddenly he died in 97. So the friendship lasted between 89 and 97, and we hung out basically every year between 89 and 93.
Now, with LeVay, I mean, he went from, as you said, like working in the circus and then a debunker and whatnot, but what made him gravitate towards creating the Church of Satan? And why Satan?
Well, I think there are possibly a few answers to that. One thing could, of course, be the attraction to a symbolic force or an icon in a way that exists in every culture. We are, we know it mostly through, a Christian aesthetic and a Christian psychosis in a way, but that kind of thing where you have the devil figure as being completely evil and completely, bad and, dangerous. So that in itself is very powerful, meaning the force that goes against the reign or the status quo is very, very powerful. Especially if it has something to offer in the sense of an eloquent, intelligent opposition. Because any rebel can scream and yell and say, down with the king, whatever. But that's not the same as being in true opposition. The true opposition either makes the reigning thing stronger, or it brings it down because it's weak and it needs to come down. So when you look at it beyond the devil figure, look at it as the force. It is a very attractive force, and LeVay was attracted to that. Also, the lore and iconography of the devil in different cultures is very aesthetically pleasing. It's powerful in itself. But then you also have another aspect. He was very PR savvy. he had his magic circle going in San Francisco. He felt he wanted to, make something bigger out of that. And someone suggested, why don't you create a church for this thing, like a church of Satan? And he found that a great idea because of the fact that he was very keen to get attention. And of course, if you establish a church of Satan in 1960s San Francisco, of course you'll get attention. And that's exactly what happened. It sort of it blew up, as they say. He got a lot of attention, media, TV, magazines, radio, photographers, documentaries, and he wrote his Satanic Bible, came out in 1969, and then it just sort of snowballed until he got to the point, like in the mid-70s, when it became a little bit too much. The honeymoon was over in a way. He had his fame, he had his money, he kept on writing, but he became more and more not secluded perhaps, but a little bit more picky and choosy as to how he spent his time. And he carried on writing, and he worked with good people in trying to sort of solidify the church and also the philosophy. So I think it's twofold. The answer is twofold. You have a beautiful iconography and cultural lore having to do with this oppositional force that we can call Satan. And you have the willingness to be exposed and associated with this force in a public arena because you want that attention. You want that to be your career of choice. And he had all those things, So I think those two things merged, and it was a powerful blend. And that's the reason why he became very successful, and the Church of Satan became, a big thing. And his Satanic Bible, it's never been out of print since 1969. It just, keeps on. No, just keeps.
It's still going.
Yeah. He's still selling, keeps on ticking, and the same with his other books. It's all his books are in print now, and new generations seem to be interested, and also he's become an icon in the sense that not perhaps super mainstream, but you find him mentioned in more and more TV series, and was in one of the, I think the previous American Horror Story. There was an Anton LeVay figure there, and it was mentioned in Californication, and Satanic Bible was mentioned even in the X-Files. And, it's just become more and more and more. So he is a cultural icon in a way, gone from having been an occult icon to a cultural icon. And that's interesting. And I think that has to do with the fact that what he says, actually, when you read it, makes a lot of sense. And he's not trying to whitewash the sort of the devil thing in his writings, but he really tells it like it is, meaning it's a symbol. It's a symbol for something that is strong and dark and powerful and oppositional. But any person who's been in that kind of position, by your own design or by someone else's design, meaning you've been outside. An outsider always has projections on him or her, meaning people could be afraid of them because they're outside, or they can be ridiculed because they're outside. But it's a very special position. And for most people, it's a negative place to be because most people want to be inside. They want to be inside a community or a congregation or a community, and that's beautiful. That's just how humans are. But some people prefer to stay on the outside looking in, and they love that vantage point because it gives them power, either simply by being there, and also by the projections they get from the inside. So I think the Satan that is that stemmed from LeVay's mind is basically what it means in Hebrew. It means the adversary. It means the opposition, the thing or the force that goes against the status quo. Mm-hmm. And if that force did not exist, then things would become inert and they would die.
Yeah, I quite understand that. Charles Manson, was he connected here somewhere with LeVay?
Absolutely not. They were in the same state during the same decade. Yeah. but it's as far away from LeVay as could possibly
so
be.
he never attended the Church of Satan.
No, never. LeVay would feel nothing but contempt for him, not only because of the criminal activities, but also because he's just like mush. He was someone who brainwashed people who were high on LSD and other psychedelics, abused them sexually, and made them do horrendous things. It's as far away from Satanism as could possibly be.
Okay, fine.
No.
Is that your Mark?
That was me, but if you have a question, be my guest.
No, I was just going to say, when I first started thinking about the house, the Church of Satan, I thought it would be something like a Christian church with a spire and the steeple. I couldn't believe it when I saw a picture. It's a house, isn't it?
Well, LeVay had a house called the Black House because it was black. And it was right in the center of San Francisco. And it was one of these, what they call Victorian ladies, beautiful late 19th century houses. Quite small, but very beautiful and painted black. And so I don't know, it wasn't a church, it was his home, but they did have meetings there specifically during the late 60s and through the mid 70s, and like a ritual chamber where they performed rituals and stuff like that, but never really a church. A church building, that is.
Go ahead.
As a person, sorry Mark,
no, go ahead.
As a person, Carl, did you like him? Did you like the person for himself?
Yeah, very much. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make, the documentary film, and that the film turned into this book that just came out. And I had this premise because whenever I was there, it was so amazing. We hung out mainly at night, and, he played music live and we watched movies, and it was really nothing, no talk about Satanism. It was just hanging out, but he disseminated knowledge and wisdom in a way through these activities. And I always felt then, and more so later, that he had sort of sown little seed in us, the people who were there during the decade, as a kind of extra legacy, because his books contain his very conscious writing, conscious ideas, conscious pet peeves, obsessions, all these things that he wanted to leave behind. But he also left a lot of things behind in the people who were welcome there during the last decade, specifically. And that could be an encouragement to explore certain filmmakers, to explore certain composers, certain writers. He made me aware of, for instance, an American scriptwriter called Ben Hecht, to the extent that he took books by Ben Hecht and read to me loud, read out loud. And that for me was like, whoa, this is very cool. But it dawned on me much later that perhaps, why he had done this, sort of making me aware of it. And now this Ben Hecht writer is a very inspiring writer for me, for instance. But there were other things too. And also the people I knew then and people I got to know later, they all had this same feeling that you had hung out there and it was a social, relaxed, a beautiful, inspiring time. But at the same time, they felt that, they left with something that had been disseminated between the lines, so to speak. And that's what I write about.
I had to ask you that because I could feel it coming from you. It was like coming through the computer screen at me.
Right.
So I had to ask the question. That's really good. Now I can feel what he was like.
Yeah, right. No, he was very friendly and super intelligent and so much fun. He was mainly a musician. He was such a beautiful musician. He could improvise. At one point when he was entertaining in the kitchen where he had his many synthesizers, I asked him if he could play something Scandinavian. And just like that, he started hammering away on his keyboards, a tune that definitely sounded Scandinavian. And I called it the Satanic Hambo because I didn't know. And then much later, I found out that it was actually an old Danish Christmas song. And I mean, how the hell could he know that? It's amazing.
How the hell, indeed.
How the hell indeed, exactly. So basically, when I started talking to my old friends from back then, and also to newer friends that I'd made in the satanic, community or whatever you want to call it, I started asking them, so did you feel this way, or what did you think this meant, etc. And I could see a kind of pattern growing or emerging that became the premise of these projects. And then I, when it was clear enough to me, say, I have to make a film about this. I have to make a film. And also nice to reconnect with people I hadn't met for a long time. And so the documentary film was a great experience. But when I had done that, I realized, wow, there's so much of this material that I have not been able to use because of the limitations of the film format. So that's why I made the book. I sort of let all of the material bloom into its full glory and edited that into this book that just came out.
Yeah.
Now with LeVay and some of the wisdom that he would share with you, I mean, what are some of the things that he would talk about with you that really struck you?
I would say I came into it already knowing, the basics, meaning the stuff that he had presented in the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Rituals and the Satanic Witch, these books that had been out for a while. But at this time also he was writing a lot, these sort of shorter kinds of essays in a way. They were usually published in their newsletter called The Cloven Hoof. And they were very sardonic, funny, satirical, very much to the point. And there were two later anthologies that came out. One was called The Devil's Notebook, and the final one came out after he had died. It's called Satan Speaks. And it was that kind of thing where we could talk about a certain topic, usually not really occult or not really, satanic specific, but having to do with culture mainly, filmmakers, directors, musicians, actors. And he had this way of speaking or talking, I should say, that of course, defined by his generation. He was born in 1930, so that they, that kind of generation had a specific way of talking, and that seeped through very clearly into his writing these sort of shorter pieces. They have all been very influential for me, and I remember I can still hear his voice in a way when I'm reading his essays, because they were so casual. And this kind of casual conversation, they were so much fun, and in terms of topics or subjects, that wasn't really the point. It was the fact that you were there in what I call the devil's den in a way. And then suddenly, and this is of course my very subjective, memory or recall, but suddenly you could see in this very almost joyful or happy or very, humorous conversation, you could see kind of a gleam in his eye. And I'm not saying there was some kind of possession, but he very much reminded me at the time, and also later, now that I think of it, of a big animal. And he had worked in the circus as a lion tamer. He'd worked with tigers, basically big cats, really ferocious. And for a long time, he had a lion at home until the city of San Francisco basically forbade him because they drove the neighbors nuts. But that kind of thing where you have a discourse going on that is very casual and friendly and humorous, intelligent, eloquent, and then suddenly you see that this person has so much power, and whether that's accumulated from decades of occult work, or it's just life experience, or maybe it's just this person, that's besides the point. That affected me a lot, meaning that you can do or convey basically two things at the same time. One is an eloquent, intelligent, basically rational communication where he points you in certain directions, saying you should check out all the films that star Elisha Cook Jr., for instance, who's such a great actor. And then when you start looking at Elisha Cook, he was in many, many weird films. So that's kind of like a a cultural trace or a path that you can walk on if you want to. And of course, I sucked up everything that he suggested in terms of actors, directors, composers, etc., because it was so valuable. But at the same time, there was this unconscious thing going on also. I felt that things were being communicated to me that I was simply not mature to interpret at the time. But I think later on, these seed, as I call them, they bloomed. And for me, as a writer, for instance, I can certainly appreciate, specifically when I write in English, because I mainly, I would say I write a lot in Swedish, but that's you in a completely different style. But when I write in English, there is the same kind of, I don't know, I shouldn't call it sardonic, but there's a certain kind of satirical approach that I can directly trace back to his attitude and his essays. So that's a very direct influence. But it came not from the books specifically, it came from those moments of talking, of hearing him convey things.
Okay. I'm just wondering what he would actually think about the book. If he was here now, what would he say to you, do you think, about the book that you've just written?
First of all, I would have to say I hope that he would like it. But I would also say I know that he would like it, because it's basically a tome that celebrates his legacy, that celebrates his memory. And basically what the book is, I've written, I think it's 4 or 5 contextualizing chapters that tell my story in this. I mean, what we did and how he looked at things, and sources of inspiration for him that I'm aware of. Basically giving a bit of background to who he was and who he was to me. And then follow many of these interviews with people who knew him well and who all, substantially share their memories. So it's kind of an invaluable piece of history in a way. But also, his son is included in the book, Xerxes LeVay. And Xerxes has never been outspoken. He's been, kind of an anonymous person who's waited and matured as a human being before he felt, ready to talk about these things. So this book is the first place where Xerxes LeVay really talks about memories of his father. He was only 4 years old when his father died. So that was traumatic, of course. And then what happened then, and how people, looked at them and looked at the family and looked at his father, things like that are very, very, it's a human touch, and it's sort of a very valuable insight, because of course it's not only, sunshine and green pastures when you're, living with someone who is so controversial. And I think, as LeVay's health failed towards the later years, I think, of course, that's a reason for the extra seclusion, but also the fact that he had become a father quite late, I guess at age 63, made him want to spend the last years of his life exclusively with his family in that sense. So it's completely understandable. So these human aspects are very, very present in this book. So it's not like a biography of then he did this and then he did that. It's mostly very, very personal recollections and very unique memories of people who really, really knew him.
I was reading on the Amazon page in your thoughts about LeVay and then also your documentary Into the Devil's Den. Now, is that film available for people to see? Is it on any streaming platform?
Yeah. The main platform is Vimeo on demand.
Mm-hmm.
It's they can find it if they go to vimeo.com and go to their on-demand section and then just search for the title, Anton LeVay, Into the Devil's Den. Then they will find it, or possibly my name, Carl Abrahamsson, and they will find the film there.
Well, as a fellow filmmaker, I got my bachelor's degree in film.
I thought you'd get that one in.
Yep. One of the things I was reading here is you mentioned that, editing is a bitch. Totally agree with you there. And it's hard to, like, you had to parse everything down, kill your darlings. Man, I heard that one in film school. To make an hour and a half, 2 hour documentary where you could have made easily a 10-hour documentary. But have you ever thought of trying to sell the concept to one of the the pay-per-view, not even pay-per-view, the pay channels? Because there's a big market right now through Netflix, through Amazon, producing documentaries of all different types. And if you have that much footage...
you mean an extended version?
Yes, an extended version or a retitled version using some of the same footage, but expanded on and making a multi episode series.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I've thought about that. We'll see. I have some other film projects that are beckoning and will take certainly my attention this year. But I am going to make a little, I guess we call it an infomercial in a way, for the book basically. But of course it will push the film also. So maybe that will whet my appetite to return to that material filmically. And make something longer, or as you say, a multi-part thing. It's doable.
Okay. Now, the one question we haven't asked you yet, so I'm going to go ahead, as we're wrapping up here, get to the point. Do you consider yourself a Satanist?
Yeah, I do. And then I would have to add a LeVayan Satanist, because of course there are many people out there who are not LeVayan Satanists, and I find that I usually do not agree with them. So in a way I'm loyal to the friendship, but it goes beyond that also. I still find a strong resonance with the actual ideas that he wrote about, that sort of codified a particular branch of Satanism. It's not the only one, but it's certainly the strongest one in the from the later half of the 20th century and onwards. You could say that there were historical strains of Satanism, etc., or just Satanists, self-professed, whatever. But if we talk about our culture today, I feel that I want to add LeVayan. If I'm a Satanist, I'm a LeVayan Satanist, to sort of really amplify that I respect his ideas and also his approach. For me, it's all common sense. I don't think it is common sense to most people, but for me it is. It is this rational, critical, realistic perspective, but it also has this beautiful iconography and historical lore, not only of the devil or Satan, but also of magic in itself as a cultural agent, as an agent of change, as a cornerstone of civilization, actually. And for me, these things go hand in hand. I could say that I am also interested in Chinese Taoism, or I'm a Crowleyan Thelemite, or I'm a magical anthropologist. All of these things are basically just terms based in a kind of inadequate language. However, we are all needing these definitions to be able to navigate in our social life. So if I meet someone who says, I hate LeVay, then very likely I won't be interested in talking to that person. And I'm not, striving to be some kind of elitist that only hangs out with like-minded people. On the contrary. But when someone professes something very antithetical, that to me is a turnoff. Instead of saying, oh, so you're one of those, let's talk about that. Most people in this, vein, meaning Satanism outside of LeVay in a way, maybe they feel a little bit competitive, want to, be seen for something that perhaps they're not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that when you talk, most people look on Anton as, I can't explain, something that's not good, someone that's not good. But after talking to you today, now I see the man.
Right.
I don't see that anymore.
Well, I
see
think
the man.
I think what you're going off of is the first impressions that people get when they hear of Anton LeVay or the Church of Satan. Automatically, they go from either a religious point of view or, with our culture, not just even with our social media, with films, with television. Anything having to do with Satan is always spread from a religious point of view, from evil, and nobody takes the time to really learn what it was all about. Now, yes, there are those actual devil worshippers, religious, occultists, Satan worshippers that do practice and relish in evil, but that's not what Anton LeVay was about.
No, absolutely not. I think those people have perhaps found a little haven in that kind of symbolism, but usually those people who are really that kind of extreme, they're usually pathological criminals or criminally insane. And if they hadn't found Satan, they would probably have found some other terminology or some other cultic aspect that would have fit them to pursue their criminal pathology.
It's either criminal or it's a sense of power. Those people, narcissistic types of people, who
compensatory power. Exactly, people who have no power become freaked out and then go full throttle for its compensation. That rarely ends up well.
Yeah,
you have to go in baby steps to progress.
So the book is Anton LeVay and the Church of Satan, and as we mentioned earlier, it's currently available in the U.S. on Amazon, but you mentioned that there may be some distribution issues with over in Europe. But it may be released.
This is what I've heard, but I also heard many people who have absolutely received their copies recently. So it seems to be moving as it should.
Now, is this also available in bookstores, or is this just online?
No. It's absolutely it's available everywhere as a paperback. The audiobook was released today. The ebook is out there also, and it's on all online platforms, and it should be in all well-stocked bookstores, whether occult or general. Most general bookstores have a little metaphysical section, and this book will definitely be there. It's going to be well exposed and well received, and it's going to make people, I think, satisfied in the sense that they have not some scandalous tome writing about what a horrible person he was. I'm not trying to sort of
that's
say
what
that
this is what I was trying to get. I had a tunnel vision of him, and that was it. But after talking to you now, I see who he is. I see him for what he is, the man that he is.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's all human beings. No human being is perfect. We all have our foibles and weaknesses, and he had his. But what he left behind has the power to affect people in a very beneficial way, of inspiration, of being responsible for your own life. One of his main slogans was this thing: responsibility should lie with the responsible. And in terms of your own life, you can't expect other people to be responsible for your life. That's just unnatural. You have to assume that responsibility, and if you're not content with things in your life, then you have to change them. No one will do it for you, and if they do it for you, you can bet that they have ulterior motives that are not altruistic.
Yeah.
Now, Carl, you've written many, many books, actually. So besides this one's your newest. Where can people find out more about you? Do you have a website, or do you have...
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very simple. It's my first and last name.com, carlabrahamsson.com. Abrahamsson has 2 S's, and Carl is with a C. So it's carlabrahamsson.com.
Fantastic.
That's the best way to find all of my things, the Twitter and the Instagram and the Patreon and all these things. And also there's a list there of all the books I've written and the films I've made, etc. So that's a good place to begin.
Well, it seems like you've had a very fascinating life, and this book especially seems to have a very interesting focus on your time with LeVay. Carl, I want to thank you very much for coming on the program and talking about it, and I want to recommend everyone to check out the book here in the States especially. You can get it on Amazon and probably over in the UK and other parts of Europe as well. So thank you again for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was great. And just be well and keep those magical rings sealed up in the little box or safe so it doesn't jump out.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could just hold on for a little while, Carl, while we finish the show.
Okay. Yeah. Hold on a minute, Carl. So our guest was Carl Abrahamsson. The book is Anton LeVay and the Church of Satan. That's it for tonight's edition of the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK radio network. This has been Irene Allen and Mark Johnson, and we will see everyone next week. And remember, folks, you can always find us where, Irene?
Everywhere, folks, everywhere.
There we go. All right, everyone, you have a great evening, and we will catch you next week with a brand new show. Have a great evening.